Welcome back, everybody. We're going to do our next session now. I'd like to welcome Adrian Edge, the Fenestration Canada's Director of Codes Regulatory Affairs, and Ian Ferris with Maple Leaf Strategies. Adrian and Ian's colleagues have been working very hard for us on a lot of the activities around tariffs and development of communication with government, etc., which Maple Leaf Strategies excels at. So I'm going to just give it to them and let them do their thing and fill you in on what they're doing. All right, Ian. There should be a little. Yep, you're on. Yep. Volume?
Yeah, volume. Okay, well, thanks, Terry. Can you hear me at all? There, I think that's better. Yep. Great, thanks. Thanks a lot for the invitation to join Windor, and this is new for me and quite an exciting event. As mentioned, I'm Ian Ferris. I'm from Maple Leaf Strategies, and I'm a strategic advisor in their Ottawa office. My career has been in the lobbying industry primarily. I've run a national association, worked for a few cabinet ministers, also run a local chamber of commerce. So effectively, I've been a lobbyist, so you can just call me the lobbyist. Maple Leaf is actually, let's advance this. Maple Leaf Strategies is about a 15-year-old public affairs, government relations, and opinion polling company based in Ottawa, but offices throughout Canada. In a nutshell, we work with clients, and we work with Adrian, we work with Stefan, Terry, working with them to turn insights into influence and influence into results. So we operate in a very competitive landscape, as you do in your sectors, and we're very experienced at putting strategy to work, strategy into action, and as we guide organizations through the political and policy landscape in Canada. All right, so proactive government advocacy. We met the team at Fenestration Canada earlier this year, following the start of what is now a very tumultuous Canada-U.S. trade relationship. We work with Stefan, Adrian, and the team to understand their issues, their concerns, and the threats that the fenestration sector is experiencing. So together, we built a narrative, a very compelling narrative around those issues, one that speaks to the government's priorities, but also speaks to the fenestration sector priorities. Then we embarked on a plan to advocate for specific asks of government. And, we utilized a number of tactics. We started off on the trade front. We had a number, work with Adrian and Stefan to create a number of different written submissions to ensure that the fenestration sector was not going to be subject to the Canadian retaliatory tariffs to the U.S. That included a lot of, as I mentioned, written documents, but also some direct advocacy meetings with government, and we're successful in that front. Also, the pre-budget consultations that the government runs and that the all-party House of Commons Finance Committee run held consultation process this summer. Fenestration Canada actively participated in that, really got their messaging across, and that really helped us to define the asks for government, as I mentioned. And I'm going to come back to that, the priorities, in a couple of minutes. But first, I want to do a bit of a level set on on the discussion and fill you in from an Ottawa perspective what the government's challenges are and what's facing them in the next few months. So here I've got some polling data. This is from Canada338.com. They're an aggregator of a number of different polls that come out regularly from companies. So you're going to see, these numbers don't always mesh with the individual polls that you might see in the media. And there's even been some more tightening up. This is as of a week ago. So there's even been more tightening up in the past week. So what we have here is we've got, effectively the Liberals with a 3-point lead right now over the Conservatives. Frankly, that's not much. It doesn't change much from the last election in April. And with only the 3 points separating the parties, Canadians are making it very clear that they don't have time for distractions. They want real action on jobs in the economy, and they want it now. In terms of the impact on seats in the House of Commons, and that often can be a reflection of election readiness. I hope you can see that. I think there's Yeah. Anyways, the numbers are still very tight, just like the overall polling numbers, and there's very slight changes in the status quo. The Liberals are down a few seats and projected about three less seats. The Conservatives with 2 less seats. The Bloc Québécois seem to be, the group that are going to gain the most. They're up about 3 or 4 seats, but really this is showing that. It's really showing that this election is probably not in the cards without a clear majority, and you need. Just trying to think what to do my quick electoral math. I think you need 172 for a majority, and right now no party is going to achieve that. So what can change in the short term? The government can lose seats. The government has, lots of rumors about former cabinet ministers leaving the government for diplomatic posts. And I think we saw the start of that was with Chrystia Freeland. She's taken on a new role in Ukraine reconstruction. Now, she's still a member of parliament right now, but, she's probably she's probably started the exit out within the next 6 months or so. And so if she's followed by other former cabinet ministers, that can lead to, sorry, got a question. We're just going to get the microphone.
If Carney says yes to a pipeline in Alberta, do you think there's going to be a switch from allegiance from Conservative to Liberals, or it's going to stay dead hard?
I think the government would love that. I think you could see 1 or 2 seats in Edmonton, maybe a seat in Calgary turn. And traditionally, the Liberals would have 2 seats in Edmonton and possibly 1 in Calgary. I think there's 1 in each city now, but not a big move. But very good insight. So that's what could change in the short term. But the key takeaway is that Canadians are shifting their attention to what matters most. That's the economy, and they don't want partisan noise. And part of that nonpartisan noise is the Prime Minister currently enjoys about a 20-point advantage in popularity over his party. So it's very much about the Prime Minister and not necessarily the Liberals. So I really don't see a lot changing, but I will give the caveat that it only takes 1 vote in the House of Commons, a confidence vote, to defeat the government. And you've got the NDP right now with not a lot to lose. They want 12, they have 7 seats, they want 12 seats. That gives them official party status and a lot of funding for research and other things. And so they have not much to lose, so they may well force an election. We'll see. And that'll probably come on the budget. Now, just moving ahead, we've got, let's look at what the government has in front of it in the next few months. Certainly it has a renewed opposition, a very strengthened opposition, a timely budget with some tough news coming up, and that'll be on November 4th. And the upcoming CUSMA review, the CUSMA, the successor to NAFTA. Often you'll see it as USMCA, that's from the American perspective. But those are very, it's an economically critical agreement for us. So in terms of the first one, strengthen opposition, you've got Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has lost his seat in the last election, an Ottawa area seat. He's come back as an Alberta MP. And he's come back with certainly very focused, bit of a vengeance, I'll say. He's brought a lot tougher scrutiny on the government, and you're going to see that. We saw that this week in Bill C2, which is a stronger border bill. It's been split, and the opposition, the Conservative opposition, really focused their effort on getting that done. So that was a big success for them. Now, in terms of the other issues, they're really putting important emphasis on inflation, housing affordability, crime, and public safety. So the second part is the federal budget. So I'm going to borrow a line, just I'll butcher up a line from Charles Dickens. It's really a tale of 2 budgets. The message of sacrifice, hope, and possibility of renewal, even in the darkest of times, in A Tale of Two Cities, is kind of reflected in the budget. There's going to be 1 budget, but it's going to have 2 parts to it. So there's going to be cuts, an austerity budget, a fiscally austere budget from an operational perspective. All departments, government agencies, crown corporations have been asked to cut their operating expenses by up to 15% over 3 years, and you're going to see the first cuts coming in this budget. On the flip side, there's going to be critical investments made in major projects, and you've seen the creation of 3 new corporate entities, one for housing, one for defense procurement, and one for major projects. And so there's going to be lots of investments in those. The Prime Minister's been very clear. Those investments shouldn't be roped in with the operational expenses. So when he talks about balancing a budget, it's from the operational perspective and not the overall perspective. And then, of course, this week there was a move. The finance minister testified before the finance committee, and he made an announcement that budgets will now move to the fall. So they'll do a fall presentation of the budgets going forward, where it was always in the spring before. And I think some of the benefits that are coming from the government, they're saying that these it leads to better planning. It leads to better planning, particularly for the main estimates. The main estimates are what the House of Commons votes on. It actually votes money in the spring, and it gives them a little more time so that you've absorbed the messaging in the budget by the time you're actually coming to a House vote. So it makes a bit of sense. And also, there's the line that it would be better for construction season. It takes a long time. So if you're doing a budget in April, March or April, and it's finally passed in June, you've missed a whole nother construction season. So those are some of the big things that are happening. The CUSMA formal review, you will have seen yesterday with the Prime Minister's visit to the White House with some of his senior ministers. You have President Trump saying, who knows? We're not sure what his view is on CUSMA review. He could take it or leave it. He could do the trilateral agreement renewal, or he can do a series of bilateral agreements. So that kind of threw a bit of a wrench into the works yesterday, and we're hoping to hear more in the next few days on where the U.S. will focus on the CUSMA review. Now, we've got these challenges. You've got a budget coming, you've got a strong opposition, CUSMA coming. What is the government doing to prepare for that? So the PM has surrounded himself with a very senior cadre of officials. He's got a new chief of staff. And let's remember, this is a PM who's a political novice. So he really needs some experienced people. And he's brought in people that have tremendous corporate and government experience. So the new chief of staff to the Prime Minister, Marc-André Blanchard, former head of a national law firm, was Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, and he also was a senior executive at one of Quebec's major pension funds. So he's really going to bring a discipline to the Prime Minister's office, the work with cabinet and political staff. Also, the new top public servant, the clerk of the Privy Council, is Michael Sabia. And again, Michael Sabia is no stranger to the business community. He's a former CEO of Hydro-Quebec, former CEO of Bell Canada Enterprises, and of course was the Deputy Minister of Finance. So he's got that government pedigree. And so with these two and some of the other people they surrounded at more junior levels, you can really expect a more disciplined and professional approach to government. And I think this will really help for the style of government that the Prime Minister is pushing. And of course, with Mr. Sabia in, I think you can expect him to put his stamp. He's very senior, very well respected, and you can see him to put his stamp on the public service with the deputy minister shuffle. And he really needs to put the right people into the right positions on major projects, and that's going to be critical. So, with that new Prime Minister comes new priorities. And typically what a government would do, what a Prime Minister would do is issue mandate letters to each individual minister detailing a number of priorities, a number of things that Prime Minister wants the cabinet to undertake. Prime Minister Carney took a different view on that, and he gave one mandate letter to the entire cabinet, and it had 7 elements to it. I'm just counting 2, 4, 6. Of course, there's 8 in there because the second and third ones are actually combined. But establishing a new economic and security relationship with the U.S. is going to be pivotal. You see the PM in Washington yesterday for the second time in 5 months. That's going to be critical to really work with our largest trading partner, but also to figure out how are we going to diversify that trade relationship with other countries. Building one Canadian economy, and that's the internal trade, as well as major infrastructure projects. And those projects can be energy projects, they can be trade-enabling infrastructure, they can be transportation corridors, a whole host of them. And you're seeing lots of commentary in the press right now, particularly from provincial premiers, on what their priorities are for the federal government. bring down costs for Canadians, housing affordability. I'll get into some of these a little more later. But those are the 7 priorities in 8 bullets for the government. Now, I mentioned a few minutes ago, we worked diligently with Fenestration Canada and their team to build a narrative and asks that resonated with the fenestration sector, but also with the government priorities. And so, many of these the issues that the fenestration sector have put forward mesh nicely with the government's priorities, and particularly on housing, Canada-U.S. trade, and affordability. But to that end, we identified a number of formal asks for government, and here's the 3 asks that are on the screen. So first is government financial support to undertake a national glass market study, take a strategic look at investing in domestic capacity for float glass manufacturing, and then focus on government enforcement of existing rules and compliance measures to ensure a level playing field for glass imports that meet Canadian standards. So with that, I think I'm going to stop right there. I know Adrian's very eager to get a Q&A and get the audience involved. This will not be question period in Ottawa, where there's lots of questions and very few answers. Hopefully, we'll give you a little more context. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. And before we get into kind of the back and forth I'm hoping to have, I thought I'd just give a little bit of context from our side at Fenestration Canada, how kind of this played out. So, for those that have been kind of following the tariff conversations and some of the announcements I've been trying to push out to keep our members updated, early this year was, I tried to explain it by about mid-year that it was some of the hardest work that I've personally done. And it's not the outputs, it's certainly not the content that I was sending, but I was hearing from manufacturers and the pain and the just uncertainty of what it meant for their business was palpable. I could feel it. I could feel what you guys were going through, and it was awful. So that really helped create a clean and quick narrative early on in the year for us to put it forward to the board at Fenestration Canada that it's time for us to act. That, you all pay your dues and you come to Fenestration Canada. We act as an association that overviews the national side of things. These are things you can't do individually. This is what you depend on us for. So we put it to our board to go ahead and put some resources into Maple Leaf Strategies so we could get a lobbyist that could help us get that voice where we needed it. One of the things that, fundamentally I'm so proud that we got to this point was, when we did the counter tariffs, or when the Canadian government was looking at counter tariffs to combat the US, glass was on that list. That was obviously a no-go right out the gate. That if we are importing all of our glass from abroad, especially 90% from the US, that was going to tank our market. So we raised our hand, and then Maple Leaf Strategies raised their hand, and we got to meet with a handful of ministry offices about 2 weeks ago. And the deputy minister at housing was the one that got this glass concern. And so we got to talk to him about it a little bit, and he raised it through the appropriate ranks. And I can honestly say our voice got to the right people in Ottawa when it was needed. And that wouldn't have been possible without you all supporting Fenestration Canada and our board supporting our decision to do this. So I can't say thank you enough. That made all the difference in that moment. We've kind of taken it a step further, obviously, that, this is round 2. There's plenty of problems within the fenestration space. I don't want to condense our problems to 2 or 3 bullet points, but I'm doing my best, and we're doing our best at Fenestration Canada to find the couple core things that align with government needs right now that we could potentially make a real difference in. Glass is a good one. And I will say one of our big issues with glass in Canada is that if we had a modern glass plant today, we would overproduce supply by 60%. We'd have way more glass than we need. We'd have to find export markets for it. So honestly, the housing mandate as it currently is provides us a really great opportunity to step into that fold and start figuring out what would it take to make sure we get glass production in the future. Because for anybody that was around during COVID and you experienced the supply shortages, I've never seen another moment that we could have stopped construction quite as aggressively. And it's on us. Like, it's our market. So when we put the pre-budget consultation in, it was after a lot of conversations with the handful of players that could be playing in that glass plant space. And the first thing they said is, look, investors are there. Like, there's money there, but you'd have to create a market need for it. And if there's no market need, we're not coming. So the glass market study is really supposed to address some of the key issues in our view that would keep a glass plant from coming here. So, what is real export possibilities? Where should they go? What is the most strategic place to put perhaps the only glass plant that would show up here? And, how do we deal with the commerce issue with moving glass from one side of the country to the other? Like, there's some major logistical issues with this particular problem. But if we don't have control over our supply chain, I don't know how we make this better. That's a huge portion of our costs. So, talking with one member, they get their glass coming in from overseas, and it first goes to the US and then comes up to us. That should be startling to anybody that's kind of dealing with it. That tells you that there's enough margin for somebody in in Europe to sell to the US, to sell to us. It tells me that there's some problems in our logistics there. But anyway, long story short, first step is to figure out how do we work with the federal government to trigger that investment response. And then second, which is the second goal there, is how do we de-risk that investment? Like, there are major project offices now that we could actually the government could be helping look at that. And so yeah. Anyway, in a nutshell, this has been kind of Fenestration Canada's first step into advocacy. It's a big thing for us. We've had, traditionally Fenestration Canada has been your educator. Our job has been to stand up here and tell you what's going on in the world. It's not necessarily been to shape it much, but we're there. I think as an association, we've matured to the point that now we can act as a legitimate voice. And I know personally, I'm so appreciative that you guys entrusted that to me, that I will continue to do my best to steward that. And with that, we're going to get into the Q&A, because I think one of the things that is hardest for me is figuring out what it is as members you need from this. If we're going to act as your voice, we're going to act as your hands and feet. It's important for me to hear from you. And luckily, I say luckily, it was such a terrible moment, but under all the stress, I gathered so much input from our industry. I heard so much about what was going on day to day. I'm so grateful that you guys called me and we talked through it and we found solutions to your problems. And, it was only on one segment, but I really look forward to what that grows into in the future. So all that being said, Ian, you've been kind of working through this with me. And so I think you've got a pretty good feel of where we're at. And you certainly have a good idea of where the government's at. And I think you're seeing it from multiple vantage points. What do you think of our industry story when it comes to what the government's trying to achieve? Like, are we in alignment? Are there ways we could sculpt this story so that it fits better?
Well, very good question. Again, the government's got their set priorities. If you're not, as an industry association, as a company, as any interest going to government, if you're not going to speak to their priorities, it's probably going to fall on deaf ears. And I think, Adrian and Stefan and the team have put a lot of thought into those priorities. And again, I like what Adrian's saying. There's a lot of issues, kind of cherry pick some of the issues, some of the ones that we think resonate well. But the government's housing agenda is significant. I mean, they're now talking about, just reading this morning, they're talking about 4.8 million homes needed by 2030. Getting up to 500,000 homes a year. That's over doubling where we are right now. And we know that there's a lot of issues at municipal and provincial levels to deal with. But I think the fenestration sector is aligned nicely with where the government's going on housing. I think that's a critical one. Also, you see, and it's not an anti-U.S. rhetoric, on part of the government and their trade relationship with the U.S. But I think, I talked a bit about diversification. We need to diversify markets. And whether that's markets that the fenestration sector are importing from or exporting to. So the sector really, is aligned well with the some of the the trade agenda to diversify. And you're reliant on the U.S. right now, so that's critical. I'm not saying throw that out, but you've got to do a little more. And then affordability. I think housing affordability is a tough one. I mean, is it non-market housing? Is it market housing? But as we don't jokingly say it, but it's kind of said with tongue in cheek. There's no house and no car without doors and windows. So your sector is critical to the economy. I think your comments about Deputy Minister Haluka at housing were very appropriate. He realizes, he gets it. He's got a tall challenge in marshalling the government and the new Build Canada Homes organization to achieve this. And without a good partner like the fenestration sector that can deliver, it's going to be impossible to meet that. So I think you're well set for the meshing with the agenda of the government.
Well, that couldn't transition better to kind of my question really to the audience as a whole, which is about affordability. It's like one of the big things we noticed, at least Stefan and I noticed whenever we were in Ottawa going through and meeting the different minister offices and their ministers. The story that we told about Fenestration Canada and our space is such a big portion of what their willingness to give is only as good as the story that we tell. And it's amazing the flesh that came out of like a 30-minute conversation, especially like with the housing minister's office. They were really well prepared. They know our sector fairly well. I don't think this is the first time they've run across windows and doors and thought about glass, because they drilled right into some, I think, pretty impressive questions. I remember walking away from that conversation going, I think I've about tapped out my well of technical information. And for those that have listened to me go down these paths, not to toot my own horn, I think that's pretty deep. But
sorry, Adrian, I disagree. I think you've got a lot more technical ability to.
That's very kind.
You were just scratching the surface.
So my question to the audience: affordability is one of those really deep, fundamental problems in our housing market. How is that impacting your business at the moment? Like, can people give me some stories on what's going on in your prospective markets? How is affordability changing people's buying practices?
The thing that's affecting buying practices most common is the insecurity rather than the affordability. That's the larger sector. In other words, people want to know where they're going and whether then they can afford them. Because a lot of this stuff is long. When you talk about houses and mortgages, it's not a one-day decision. So I would say, stability is the key issue.
Well, this is the middle of the day. This isn't early morning here, so you got to have some.
Don't be
people to
shy.
tell the
You
story.
should be awake by now.
So one of the questions I have for you, looking at compliance. So one of the things is we're asked for all these requirements. There's no inspections, so you can do whatever you want at the end of the day. So you're talking about affordability. One option is to no longer look at the standards and just give whatever we want out to the public as a manufacturer, so we can be competitive, as Trump was saying yesterday, competitive. Or if the government wants to keep standards, which they ask us to keep, what are they going to do to make people compliant? Because for me, there's no use being compliant if everyone else can do whatever they want and we don't have to, and we're held accountable, but everyone else can do whatever they want. And it can make a big difference between 25 to 30% in the cost. So like for us, we buy our extrusion from Montreal. They employ about 250 people. We can buy it now for about 35% cheaper straight from China, which would put everyone out of work in Montreal. That means no taxes for the government. That means they can't pay their bureaucrats. But they still don't understand that. I speak to very intelligent bureaucrats and explain to them if there's no businesses paying taxes, you won't have a job. And they don't understand that, even though they have PhDs or they're lawyers. So it's very difficult to get through to people if they don't understand the importance of us paying taxes and compliance.
So completely agreed. And of our pre-budget asks, that really speaks to item number 3. So it was an interesting one. I even remember us going through and trying to decide what pre-budget asks made sense. And the third one is about increasing the support for enforcement. So really CBSA and CATT support. And the conversations we were having were, please understand, we are aggressively regulated as an industry, but you have not produced any levers from the federal side to protect us from imports or interprovincial trade. There is nothing here that you can pull on to help us. So first off, we need those levers. That was a serious ask, and that showed up, I'd say, in of the 9 conversations, 8 of them, where we were explicit, that's first go. So, I think that's one of the disappointing things about the NRCan conversation during the Manufacturers Council, where the federal label program would have been kind of the first stab at a lever. In lieu of that, maybe there needs to be some education to the CBSA on what non-compliant product looks like coming in. But it first has to start with regulation that clearly and explicitly calls out what the enforcement actions need to look like.
And just for our GR, government relations person, the other thing too is great to have regulations, because we have regulations, no, don't speed, don't do this, etc. Unless you have a mechanism where you can put fines and they actually apply those fines, there's no use. I mean, it's simple as that.
Yeah, any regulation without enforcement is good suggestions.
Building on the same point, we're seeing large projects go forward with foreign imported Windows systems, not just the glass. Now we're seeing Taiwan and Thailand and different places bring in entire stage systems, glass walls, you name it, for major infrastructure projects where I'm a consulting engineer. I stand up and I say, hey, where's the NAF testing? Where's all the data? Show me that the glass is compliant. If I get anything, it's a cooked book and it's not true. And then we wind up with 12 breakages in the first 6 months. Like, that glass is not heat treated. We're starting to talk safety, only nobody will listen. We can't even get the cities to understand they need to enforce the code that's in place. The people who are already legally obligated to do that enforcement don't. And when the professionals stand up and say, hey, somebody needs to actually enforce the law, please enforce existing law, I get in trouble. I've had a complaint against my license for bothering a city to do their job. So it's a lot bigger than a direct issue of enforcement.
Yeah.
Even the people who are already tasked with enforcement are refusing to do so. So there needs to be a voice in the industry saying, at least, at a minimum, scratch the surface with what you already have in place. And it's not happening. There's about a dozen projects in Ottawa right now that are all going to suffer the same consequences in the next 6 months to a year because they're bringing in foreign product.
Yeah. So I love that you've gone this direction, because it's something that it took us about a year to come to the conclusion at Fenestration Canada. What we did is, so in our last conversation, we kind of hinted at this, but I'll unpack it a little bit more. We, about a year ago, more than a year ago, if Mike Bruno was here in the room, he'd tell you he's been putting up his hand for this conversation for 4 years, trying to talk to people about, like, enforcement's a serious problem, compliance is going to be an issue. And so we had a directive about a year ago to start collecting all the data necessary for us to figure out what's it going to look like for the association to play a role in enforcement. It's a difficult subject, frankly, because we're kind of having to thread the needle on this one. As an association, I will not go after manufacturers personally, right? Like, it's not, we represent the manufacturers. How can I play police with you all? Like, I would, that's not how that works. Well, at the same time, I absolutely have a responsibility to protect you all from bad actors. So the role of Fenestration Canada moving forward is that when levers exist, in Ontario, there's the Energy Efficiency Act. There's an act. That's easy. There are nice, clean enforcement levers. We should be going after that aggressively. And now I have permission from the board as of yesterday to start doing that on your behalf. So our first goal, though, is to educate those manufacturers that are not playing fair in the sandbox. So we will do that. Like, we will take on that effort and make sure that those that are not playing compliantly understand what it would mean to do so. If they are not going to play compliantly in our space, it's my job to raise that up to the next level and make sure that government official is being held accountable for doing the job that we've asked them to do. Now, I think the idea of compliance being used as a code compliance directly, tricky. We just don't have levers that are explicit on what the AHJ's responsibility is when it's not being compliant. They can kind of decide, and it's weird. It's weird space. Like, when you get down into kind of the mechanics of how code is to be interpreted, they have a responsibility as a AHJ to follow the code as appropriate to their area, but they actually get a lot of leeway on what that means. So there's the one hand when good, clean levers exist. That's our job as Fenestration Canada. And then in the meantime, we will continue to advocate for levers that make sense for our industry. So like NAFS is a good one. We don't have any. Across the country, there are no levers for what happens structurally with glass, which is, I think it's just a result of, it wasn't the maturity step we were at, but we're definitely there now, and it's time to fix that. So we'll be working on that. I want to hear it from our membership and from the community at large. Please let me know when those things happen, because when I've got example projects, that gives me the ability to go to the officials we're building relationships right now and say, hey, it's time. Like, this is a problem. This is what the cost was. This is being done across the board. Please help us help you. So.
Yeah, it's working. On the affordability piece, one of the things that I didn't see up there on Carney's list of stuff was any mention of climate change, environmental sustainability, that kind of thing. And absolutely under the Trudeau government, that would have been in there. I'm not pronouncing any judgment one way or the other, just saying that's the fact. One of the you're talking about compliance and enforcement and that kind of thing. That is a fairness issue that exists in this room that everybody wants to see resolved for sure. But on the affordability piece, what is needed is less standards and less things that make the product more expensive in order to be put into the buildings. Is there now, sorry, this is long, but I'm sorry. Starting 7 years ago, something like that, NRCan began it. They did the market transformation thing, and there were, there was this great wind in the sails of the environmental initiatives in Ottawa, right? And Adam Beast with Boost, with the label, and we're seeing initiative after initiative roll out. They're promising embodied carbon in 2030. Should we reading the tea leaves with Carney, should we read that the wind is going to go out of the sails? Guilbeault is not in the environment ministry anymore. Should we read that the wind is coming out of those sails a little bit, that possibly as the affordability becomes more important, the manufacturers in this room are not going to be asked to make things that are ever more expensive and ever more, to increase beyond what's already been done, to change designs and only sell a very high performance product. Do we see that the wind is coming out of those sails a little bit, and that maybe the environmentally, the affordability will become more of a priority, I guess, is my question.
Very good comments. Yes, this is not the same government. Mr. Carney has lots of fantastic sustainability credentials. but he's chosen a different path, particularly with the major projects. You know, when you're talking about big oil pipelines and transmission lines and, you know, building, you know, what was his line? Build, baby, build, or something like that. You know, something's going to have to be sacrificed. And I don't think, you know, I like your comment that the wind's coming out of the sails. I think it's a bit. I think it'll come back at some point, but in the short term, you know, in this year, maybe the next 2 years, you know, sustainability and climate is going to have to take a bit of a back seat.
And so I'll just add a little bit to that. I would say the work that we do with like the CBHCC on the national code, though that wind is in that sail pretty aggressively right now. It's going to take a little while for that to even die down. And so there's kind of like two segments of that conversation. There is the federal government's ambitions, so what they want to see done. And then there's all the mechanisms that sit underneath it that are still operating. And I have a hard time seeing that the core values of those systems that underlie are going to change all that much at the moment. Now, the affordability is a serious want. And I know sitting at the National Building Code, talking about the 2030 standards, that conversation comes up almost every meeting is like, guys, we have to start looking at this through the lens of affordability. If we're making changes about embodied carbon, but we're not looking at the cost impact, then that's a problem, right? So, you know, I think this is, it is. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's what's happening. You know, I think this is where it's a cool moment for our association to be playing an advocacy role, because there's probably this middle ground in my view. Like I can imagine that we get to this place where we can find simplifications in our market that both meet the future demands while helping decrease complexity. But that takes a lot of effort, and it takes input, and it takes us interacting with federal governments and provincial governments to figure out what that means. So, you know, I think if without additional input, if the government were to just kind of do their own thing, I think in time, if the affordability doesn't come down, yeah, I think we're just going to go to lowest common denominator. I don't think, honestly, you know, I would love to be corrected in this room. I don't think this room wants to go to lowest common denominator. I don't think I don't know if anybody wants to contest me on that. I'm super open for that conversation. But if we could have the complexity of the market that we have, while it's easier to implement, that would be best case scenario. I think people would prefer that. And if we can work towards that, that's what my suggestion would be. But I'm open. Again, affordability is a good one. So if anybody disagrees with that sentiment.
And well, Adrian, I just want to interject. I like what you said about, you know, it difficult for that, you know, below the, you know, the top level to change. And I use the nautical analogy a little further. I think it's, you know, this is a prime minister who's got, you know, I mentioned the new clerk of the Privy Council. You know, it's going to really be up to him to help steer that ship and turn that ship around. And it, you know, when I talked about the deputy minister shuffle, hopefully that'll come up in the next few weeks. But he really needs to put people in place who can do things, you know, along the same lines. All right, I don't know if that's a hook or what. I don't know.
The doorbell. Hey, Kyle.
Thank you. Just maybe one comment to the affordability and the lowest common denominator. If we are continuing our push for environmental purposes and the standards and the cost of all that, would it not be prudent for a manufacturer to have a lowest common denominator and then also have somewhat of a push up to be able to play in the market that is perhaps unfair, as described up there? So there is still a spot for that manufacturer in the market. Maybe just some comments there, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's a great comment, and I think you're right. I'll have to wrap my head around that a little bit, because there is some serious discussions about what modular buildings look like in the future, what standardization of windows look like. How do we pump out? If you're going to meet 500,000 homes in addition, we're going to have to start standardizing things in a way we don't currently do in Canada, which means there's probably space for that conversation. I'm going to take that one away. I don't have an immediate answer right now, but that's a good one.
what the manufacturers have to realize is the government has ideas, but they don't always follow through or think through what happens. An example, immigration. They were told by government officials, if you start entering more than 300,000 people, we won't have enough housing for them. They got in about 1 million a year. And now we have people living on the streets. We don't, like in Ottawa, you can't walk downtown without seeing people sleep on the floor. And it's sometimes minus 30 and they have no sleeping bags. So you have to remember that you have a government that doesn't always think. So sometimes bringing solutions to the table makes them, think ahead of the curve. So
Yep, that's a very good comment, and I really do. I do want to say that that Adrian and Stefan in those meetings in Ottawa, they really do bring that perspective. They bring the industry issues, the sector issues, but they're really bringing the the I don't know how to describe it. Anyways, you guys are really doing a great job. So leave it at that.
Thanks for tooting my horn. So I guess I'll ask one more question. Oh, perfect.
It's not so much a question as a statement of confusion. The lifeblood of fenestration is new homes, not renovation, but new homes. The government is saying that they need to reach their goals, they need to reach 500,000 home starts a year and so forth, which is more than double what we have right now. And in fact, I would suggest much more than double, because it's typically 180 and 190 and 200,000. So the government is saying they want 250, and that will help the fenestration industry no end. However, the way to get that is with multiple homes, which are maybe lower cost or so, but the builders are looking at it in terms of the profit margins, and they're building large and expensive homes. So we have a complete vision backwards. Like, we want the most, the builders want the less but more expensive. So how are we ever going to get to 500, let alone maybe get into 250? Unless we can, as an industry, I don't know whether it's lobbying or what it is, but how do we get the builders to be, is it by issuing regulations to say that they have to, or prevent them from building the expensive homes? I'm totally confused on how we expect to get to 250 or 500 when the price of the house is more important to the builder who doesn't want to build those houses. I'm totally confused about the whole issue, and I'm not sure how fenestration can help. However, I believe there's something needs to be done in that direction.
Yeah. It's a great comment. And frankly, I think we've had a couple moments, and even when we were talking in Ottawa, where it's, your biggest issue in Ottawa right now is that you've put this goal out that is, frankly, no one believes is possible. That it is an unrealistic goal in our current collective imaginations. But honestly, we can see that it benefits our industry, no question. Ideally, more houses should also benefit builders in some way. But trying to figure out where that balancing act is between builders that want to build market homes and builders that want to build, a non-market home. So there's a lot of different theories on how you get there, but non-market housing is a big one that Vancouver has been exploring. It's not a perfect model. When you get into this place where you tell the builders they don't get a profit, they're not making a profit, they're making cost plus. Working as an employee for the government when you've been running your own construction business isn't the most attractive business to run. But trying to find that balancing act is exactly what we need to be doing if we want to see more houses. So I know that's a big conversation at the government level, and maybe Ian, you can speak more to that if you've heard more than I have, but I know they care about it. I know they see it. I know that that's a gap. When we've talked to CBHA or Canadian Home Builders Association, it's an issue for them. They don't like it. So yeah, there's a gap there for sure. And until that gap can be explained in such a way that we collectively trust that that's right, a lot of these things are just not possible. But, you know, when I think about the glass problem, when it's dealing with our industry, we have to make sure they're as successful as possible, because without them being successful, there's no reason to put a glass plant here, which means that we're going to continue to have to import glass. So that's kind of where I ran into at the end of the day with this conversation. It is our job to support the government to actualize that mission.
Also, I just want to make one comment before we go to the next question. Minister, Minister Robertson, the housing minister, he's been very clear that he wants to talk about modular housing. He wants to talk about new wood technologies, doing things more affordably. So I think that's where the government feels that they can, whether it's the non-market sector or the market sector, they really feel that they can, make some headway there. But clearly they're not going to be able to build 500,000 modular homes. I mean, it's just not going to make any sense. But that's where the government is focused right now, rightly or wrongly, and it takes industry interests and advocacy to change their mind. And so that's what's the key.
Does the industry actually want to ship a $50,000 window package to one site, or 10 $5,000 window packages? That's a great question for the industry, because I'm pretty sure I know the answer.
I do too. And I'm really hopeful that this whole conversation about float glass kind of plays into that, because the logistical challenges of sending glass from one side of the country to the other is major, but it's a lot less major if you could cut down that glass for standard packages. Let's say theoretically Ottawa Housing Society had big contracts for a handful of window companies, and the window companies could send fixed size glass for all of those windows, and they show up. And that's a lot easier of a package to play with. But
yeah. So we got about 10 minutes left. I want to come back to the glass market study. You touched on it quite a bit, talked about objectives and that, but where are we today? Like, is this happening? Is the industry going to be involved? And where are you headed right now with that?
Yeah. So where we are at the moment is, after our meetings in Ottawa, we essentially figured out that we had asked for $60,000 for a glass market study, only to be told by the Minister of Finance office and Finance Canada it wasn't enough money. That it was a reasonable ask. It does the right thing. It goes in the right direction, but $60,000 just is too small. But the regional offices, so that's like Pacific Can and Prairies Can and ACOA, they all can play in that space. And our next step, and Ian and I were just talking about this beforehand, is that we'll be working on a proposal to the deputy minister that overlooks all of those regional offices for a national study that would look at the infrastructure requirements at different points. We'll ask for more money so that we can do all of those. And at that point, once we have acceptance on a budget like that, yes, the idea would be to go ahead and put together a task group very similar to the life cycle inventory task group that will be gathering input on what that looks like, or at least give people a front row show of what that looks like. But that would be the intent, is that we first get an approval from either their office or one of the regional offices to fund that glass study. And then we'll be releasing a bulletin to our membership so you guys can see what's happening and how you can participate.
I got a question. So float glass manufacturing is a very energy intensive process. Where can we put this plant where the energy costs are low and the carbon emissions associated with the generation of that energy is also low? Because just as an observer, I see things like Bix Pickles, a Canadian brand, still Canadian cucumbers, but they're pickled and they're jarred in the US because it was cheaper to move it down there. Crown Royal, Doug Ford was pouring it on the ground the other day because he's pissed off because the bottling plant is going to Manitoba. Are we going to be able to put a float glass plant somewhere in Canada where we're going to be competitive from a cost perspective and not have a carbon emissions that are going to go contrary to government's other initiatives?
Yeah, great question, and I can only answer half of them. So on the one half, yes, and we have an example of a potential manufacturer that already has permits down on the ground. So they could overcome the emissions. They are in a province that the emissions or the energy that they'd be using for it is clean enough, I think, for the province to be happy with it. Whether or not it's a marketable product at that point, it's a great question. And that's actually what the market study is supposed to be addressing, right? It's like if we look at, say, putting up a glass plant in BC, or like, even for my neck of the woods, northern BC near Prince Rupert. I personally would love that. But if you were to do something like that, where you've got exportability out to Asia, that has its own benefits because now you've got the market. But is BC happy enough with, call it, the carbon emissions and how the plant was designed? That's totally dependent on the company that shows up and the investors that want to deal with it. If you were to put it in, say, Quebec or in the Maritimes, again, great exportability because I can put it on a ship and ship it out to Europe. And what we have available to us in Canada as far as raw resources, our sand is some of the lowest iron sand that you can get in the world. Architects want that right now. Like, that is a serious, like, I want more clarity in my glass. For whatever reason, the 2VT number is really getting people. But I think we've got a marketable product at the moment. And so I would hope that once we have enough market requirement within Canada that we can feed ourselves, that the percent difference, call it at 20 or 30% where we can export, is viable. But all of this is really going to come down to what companies show up and what risk mitigation we can get from federal and provincial governments. It's like, how do we help accelerate this process? Because I honestly think at a certain point, we are going to grow as a country where this is going to be a no-brainer, but I'm pretty sure we can't grow there if we don't have the ability to produce our own very basic material. Because we're going to have to, like, if we were to meet the housing mandate, obviously you've got two paths. Either we create our own glass or we import double the amount of glass and we expose ourselves to twice the risk. So
Sorry. So I wanted to pass along, it ties into all of this. I wanted to pass along what the recommendations would be from organizations like the CHBA, OHBA, ResCon, all the various big construction. That they have an answer to the gentleman's question, or at least parts of an answer to the question of how do you get the housing market going? How do you boost the business? How do you eventually justify a float glass plant? All of these 500,000 units, all of these great things. Obviously, government building modular housing is never going to, it's not going to get there. And certainly Ottawa doing it is never going to get there because it isn't Ottawa's business. And I'm surprised that the premiers have even been as chill as they have been about Ottawa getting involved in all of this. But anyways, the recommendations that come from the construction groups, right? Deregulation, get the GST off the housing, get the municipalities almost out of the business, get them to shut up and get out of the way so that the bill, and then what happens is, the theory is the builders build what the market wants. They build what they can make money on. As people move into that, it frees up the bottom layers and the lower, more affordable stuff becomes available, right? That's the theory. And so it is the answer. And then maybe, so Fenestration Canada's out there saying, we're involved with advocacy on behalf of our members, right? What approach are we recommending to Ottawa, right? And down to the provinces and all the rest of them, right? It sounds like from the smart people in the industry that I've read that this deregulation message, this get the taxes, get the development charges, get the DCs off of the projects, and then you have to support the municipalities with tax dollars, which God forbid means you may have to raise taxes to do something like that. But you have to support the municipalities on infrastructure, and you have to get them out of the business of putting these fees and charges on the builders. Alberta is the only place in the country that has been hitting their housing targets. And why? They take a light touch on all of this stuff. And they have a very good inspection regime. And they're faster and they turn things around quicker. So anyways, there's my recommend on the.
I think you know, it aligns with the truth of what those steps would look like from my perspective, which is we partner with CHBA. We absolutely sit behind them as far as kind of that big picture on what's happening in construction. We all want the same thing. If we get more buildings in Canada, we all win. It's a win across all of our industries. So, yeah, I thank you for the input, and it's a good reminder that I need to reach out to my counterpart over at CHBA so we can have that conversation.
I just want to say, Patrick, I mean, very good comments. The city of Ottawa, where I've got a little bit of experience with, they've recently come up, about 2 weeks ago, they came out with an announcement saying that, you know, their processes are broken, and, you know, so they're going to do I think a 50% reduction in charges on you know, the charge. I can't remember what they're exactly called, but the charges where developers will build community assets and things like that. The development charges, they've got to come down. You know, I think with under the, you know, about a year or two ago under the Trudeau government, you saw the minister, the housing minister at the time, whose name I'm drawing a blank on. He's now the justice minister. Anyway, big tall guy. He was, you know, he was pushing the municipalities, you know, incenting the municipalities, financially incenting them to change the way that they operate. And I think that's got to happen too. Now the provinces weren't happy. They were, you know, a number of premiers were upset. But I think everyone's going to, I hate to say it, everyone's going to have to come together, and it's not a kumbaya moment, but we're going to need to have, you know, progress at every level if we're going to meet anywhere near any of these targets. And
yeah, no question.
Municipalities will go, we can't vote.
So I don't want to end on a negative note, but I do want to mention, because I think Pat had a good point, but one of the things that I'm seeing, a lot of the new permit uptakes are down, new build starts are down. We've had 2 foundations filled in the last year. A 22-story building was canceled in Ottawa. I only know about 6 markets personally, maybe another dozen I have a feel for. None of this meaningful. It's all tripe. It's very, very much the opposite of what's actually happening. And when you try to say to somebody, everything you're hearing on the news is ridiculous, it's the opposite of what's actually happening, people poo-poo and have this attitude like, I heard the exact same words out of another prime minister's mouth. It was 2015, take 2 in 2025. It sounded like the same speech 10 years later. And the deregulation portion is part of it. But more importantly than deregulation, when we're talking about more jobs, more future, more economic success, more, there are 400 unionized framers out of work in Ottawa, and all new home starts from condo to apartment building all the way down through are massively down, and nobody talks about it. I made a blog post and it's not gone anywhere. I think it had 3 views, which makes me feel like somebody's suppressing that stuff because it hits all the top buttons. And when I post something about leadership or, you know, gender improvement in our industry, it goes mad and there's thousands of views. But I post something saying, hey, 2015 just happened again. Could we please have a little less regulation? I mean, I came from a federal government position where I did a lot with trying to get things done. I was the National Capital Areas project manager on the National Project Management Committee, setting policy. And I watched what the government was doing. I put my hand up and said, this is Enron. You are making mistakes. Things are going to go wrong. You've called one of your programs Phoenix. It's guaranteed to burn. So it's a very appropriate name. And the other thing you're doing with RP1 is going to fail as well. It has to fail. It's impossible for it not to fail. If I said much more, I'd breach the Secrecy Act. But I can assure you, no one gave a flying at all. It's all ideology all the way. So unless we can convince them that everybody doing the work is going to have some wonderful government-related job, it's not going to happen. And I don't know what else to do, because I left the federal government in abject frustration, but everything I said has come true, because it's not hard to play the ancient Greek Cassandra game when it's the exact same thing that's happened before, right? History rhymes. I don't know how to stop it, but all of this talk isn't doing anything. Permits have gone down by 2/3, so a lot less building. The 180K, I think, was a valid number, and I think you're going to see 90K built, not 500.
I don't think I can even start contesting it. So I'm just going to leave it here. I agree. I think the current reality is probably grimmer than the numbers we're currently at that we're seeing. I'd like to believe that there's some lag effect here. There's a difference between certainly a strategic stance and what it means to implement. Federal government does not run at, or industry for that matter, run fast enough to make a strategic decision that was back in, what, June, July, when we started getting Carney's kind of housing mandate to where we are today. But there's so much work behind that. Like, if we're going to see that future in the next 5 years, there's a lot of work. And not like work meaning that we've got buildings to put together, but there's a lot of actually like infrastructure, regulatory work that we could even do at our side. And I think that's a serious conversation at Fenestration Canada moving forward is how do we decrease the cost on our little segment of the business? How do we make this more efficient? And so, you know, I'm a big believer in this concept of find your 1,000 square feet and make it as clean and beautiful as humanly possible. And that's what I intend for us to do. So for what it's worth. And then I'm going to finish off to say we do have an advocacy committee that we have put together. I think one of the issues that I've had over the course of the last 9 months or so is I've been calling manufacturers directly and trying to gather information on what's going on the ground. I need a system that I can gather that information more constructively. So we will have a committee. If anyone's interested, we've got the beginning of a policy agenda. We'll have our first inaugural meeting probably in November. We'll go over, you know, our strategic direction as Fenestration Canada on where we're going and gather your input if that's what you see too. So anybody interested, feel free to reach out to me. And otherwise, Ian, thank you so much for coming and presenting with me.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your insightful questions.
Thanks, Ian.